So, namaskar, friends, and welcome once again. We are into lecture number 50, and now we are going to talk about one of the most celebrated works of Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni. And as I told you in the previous class, this collection uh, is one of the one of the most prominent collections when it comes to talking about the diasporic experience from the perspective of women, as it comprises 11 short stories centered mostly on Indian Bengali women, um, who are navigating complexities of love, marriage, and migration, often in transnational context. So, through richly drawn characters and emotionally evocative prose, Divakaruni explores how cultural displacement, gender norms, and diasporic identity crisis shape the lives of these immigrant women. And this analysis examines the collection through the diasporic lens, focusing on key themes such as cultural hybridity, alienation, gendered migration, and the conflict between tradition and modernity. So it was published in 1995, won an American Book Award in 1996, and as I said, it has uh, 11 interconnected short stories, uh, and most of these stories focus on the lives of Indian women immigrants in the United States, and even those who remain in India, exploring their experiences with arranged marriages and the complex interplay of tradition, identity, and personal desire. So, arranged marriage is very common to India, friends. It's a direct outcome of the patriarchal society in India, as in India, marriages are always considered sacrosanct, and it's a very important institution for Indians. But then, arranged marriage system is not prevalent in uh, America or the Western countries, where it is more between two individuals rather than between two families. So, in arranged marriages in India, we find that women have less agency, even they are not allowed to choose their own partners, and so there are frequent chances of mismatches, resulting in a very deplorable life for, especially for women, because you know as weaker sections of the society in a patriarchal setup, they are the worst sufferers. And there are moments when it becomes unbearable for them, but then uh, within the Indian setup, it's so difficult to uh, escape the negative experiences of marriage, and so the women have to suffer in silence sometimes, and sometimes they try to revolt, although unsuccessfully. But the same women, when they travel abroad, they find that the American society is more conducive to them, as it supports their individual liberty and happiness. And with this newfound agency and sensibility, they venture out of the traditional constraints that they usually suffer in their own country, and as a result, they are free to reshape and you know uh, make a meaningful progress in their life. So let us see, this particular text has 11 stories, as I said. The first story is called Bats. Bats are symbolic. All of us know that they are blind and they fly through the night. And in this story, we find that the story is narrated by an unnamed 7-year-old child who gradually realizes that her mother is being physically abused by her father, a foreman at a printing press. The mother endures the violence silently but eventually escapes with the child to her brother's home. In an arranged marriage, the women have only two anchors. Either they can go to their maika or the mother's place, or they can remain in their sasural, that is their husband's place. So, when it becomes unbearable for the woman in this story, and the abuses and the violence of her husband becomes unbearable, she runs away to her brother's home, and in a hope that it will keep her safe. The grandappa uncle of the narrator observes one day that a horde of bats attacks a mango grove. The uncle uses poison, but the bats keep coming despite the dead bodies. The uncle says that something keeps them bringing back. And this is highly symbolic. As I said, the bats, they are blind, and that is why they commit the same blunders again and again. And so symbolically, it talks about the woman who, despite promises from the father to change, the husband, makes promises every now and then that he will change, he will stop abusing. It never happens. The abuse recurs, and the cycle of violence and reconciliation continues, reflecting the helplessness and resilience of women trapped in abusive marriages. So, Bats is the story of that Indian woman caught in this uh, arranged marriage, which is kind of trap for her. And although her husband mistreats her, abuses her, violently attacks her, she does not find a way out. In the story Clothes, we have Sumita, a young bride who moves to the United States after her arranged marriage. She dreams of a new life and identity, is very excited, and carries all her colorful saris to the US. Her husband, always, though in a polite way, but also symbolizing his masculine power, he asks her to dress in Indian attire because he looks gorgeous in that. This is also symbolic of exercising the patriarchal power, where wife is instructed by the husband to wear whatever he likes and is never asked to exercise her own agency in choosing what she wants to wear. So Sumita, brings all those beautiful saris to America, believing that her life is going to be very colorful. But it's ironical that all her hopes and dreams are shattered as her husband is killed in a robbery at the convenience store that he has been managing. And now shatters her married world, and she is left to ponder. Well, all that color is gone from her life. And now, as an Indian widow, she is expected to wear colorless clothes representing her widowhood, and again to move back to India with her in laws, being the dutiful daughter in law. So, usually the women in India could have done the same thing, and she is also, initially thinking about it, but then um, America has transformed her, made her a little more self conscious, and ultimately she chooses to stay back in America and run the store as her husband was running, as she has always dreamt of doing herself. So, in this story, Clothes, we find that ultimately Sumita comes out of this Indian traditional marriage and carves an identity of her own as a successful, confident businesswoman in America. Otherwise, people might have expected her, now that she is alone and she has never been encouraged to think for herself or venture out, forget about running a business on her own, not that too, not in India but in the US. But then ultimately we find that she musters courage to run the business of her husband after his murder herself, and chooses to lead life on her own terms rather than going back to India as a destitute widow. The word love is yet another very compelling story in which we find that an Indian immigrant woman, who is also the narrator of the story, falls in love with an American man, Rex, and starts living with him outside marriage. So we find how she breaks free from the Indian tradition. Indian women, are not expected to live with someone outside marriage, but she does that, and she does that because she is in America, not in India. But she lives in constant terror of her mother, who is in India and who is very particular about her good conduct, and keeps on reminding her that she has to take good care of her upbringing, her culture, and don't indulge in anything that brings bad repute or bad name to her country and her family. So she is constantly torn between the love for X and her loyalty to her traditional mother in India, and she struggles with guilt and cultural expectations, and at times, introspects whether she is doing the right thing, and is not letting her own self and her mother. The narrative contrasts the physical love she shares with Rex and the deep emotional bond with her mother, who disowns her for bringing shame to the family. So she is caught between the promise of America and the expectations of her old world, that is India, the Indian tradition, and she doesn't want really to lose any of them, and that causes for immense tension and struggle on the part of her, and she starts contemplating suicide. And as she is walking with these suicidal thoughts in her mind, she decides to leave both her mother and boyfriend to start a new life with no judgments. So finally, we find that she carves her own identity, leaving behind the new world promise and the old world dutifulness, and emerges as an empowered woman who can take bold decisions and can live for herself without the support, the emotional support of her mother, or the physical proximity with her lover, American lover Rex. So, in this story, again, we find how an Indian woman who comes from a traditional society lands in America, transforms her. The agency that she experiences in America, that gives her right to choose what kind of life she would like to lead, freeing herself both from the clutches of her Indian mother and her American lover. Doors is yet another story of marital discord, where two individuals, both belonging to India, Preeti, who is an NRI student, and Deepak, who is an Indian immigrant, they decide to marry each other for love, and they defy traditional arranged marriage norms, as they, decide it on their own, and they enter this uh, holy wedlock. on their own without the consents of their families. um, you know Initially, their relationships uh, are their relationship is quite good, and they enjoy with happiness living in America. But culturally they are different, and they have different choices in life. So external pressures and their cultural differences sour their relationship. While Preeti is more concerned about her privacy and always, wants to keep her doors closed. In contrast, Deepak resists these traditional expectations, always keeping the doors open. So, these doors become symbolic of the contrast between these two characters and their choices in life. Preeti prefers her privacy, while her husband Deepak is more social, and so he keeps the doors open. And at that point in time, the intrusion of personal space by Raj, who is Deepak's friend, is disliked by Preeti, who has made situations worse for the couple. And the repeated scenarios and circumstances have made Preeti overwhelmed, leading to the closing of a door inside her. And so the doors are symbolic of Preeti's preference for her privacy, which again may be attributed to her exposure to American culture, which allows her full right to live life on her own terms. And Deepak, who despite being an immigrant, continues to revel in social life uh, like he should have done back in India. And this difference ultimately, results in their separation. The ultrasound is yet another story that revolves around two cousins, Sanju and Runo. And this story in particular comes very close to the story of the sisters, as we have seen in that earlier novel. This story also revolves around two cousins, Anju and Runu, who grew up together but whose lives diverge after marriage. Anju marries Sunil and moves to America, enjoying relative affluence and support, while Runu marries Ramesh and stays in Calcutta, living with her husband and in laws in a more traditional and conservative household. Now, both the women are married, but then they are living in two different setups, and these two different setups, impact their lives in different ways. Both women face pressure to conceive soon after marriage, as childbearing is seen as a woman's primary purpose and source of fulfillment in Indian society. And a barren woman or a woman who refuses to bear a child is always looked down upon in Indian traditional marriage. So, both the women, irrespective of their location, one is married to a person who lives in America and is expected to be much more enlightened and open minded. The other one enters the holy matrimony here in India in a more traditional setup, but their life does not really change. They both are expected to conceive and bear children for their uh, husbands. And the turning point comes when Runu, Runu's in-laws arrange for an ultrasound just to find out uh, what is the gender of the child, because in Indian traditional society, the sons are always valued over girls. And so when they find out that she is carrying a baby girl in her womb, she is, pressurized to abort the fetus, because the family does not want to bear a girl for whom dowry has to be given and all sorts of problems have to be faced. So she is pressurized by her in laws to, abort the fetus, which she refuses to do, and the only way out that she considers is leaving the house and running away from there. So she is devastated and conflicted. Her cousin Anju from America urges her to leave her husband's home and seek safety and independence, offering to support her if she comes to America. Trapped by social stigma and her mother's warnings that leaving her husband's house would ruin her reputation and her child's future, Runu resists her husband's demands. She escapes to Anju's mother and begins to build a new life using her skills in embroidery and needlework. And later, Anju and her husband Sunil help sponsor Runu's migration to America, where she finds safety and a future for herself and her daughter, using their status of her motherhood as a leverage. So, there is yet another story, The Disappearance, and it is a story which is told from the point of view of the husband, an Indian immigrant in America whose wife suddenly vanishes one day after going out for her usual evening walk, leaving her husband and son behind. And this is something that is surprising to the Indian husband, who is not able to really make out why and how wife has disappeared. The husband is marked by an authoritarian and insensitive attitude, imposing marital rape and emotional neglect. And so the wife has been suffering in silence till that point, and finally, she breaks free and disappears. The husband remarries, performing the death rituals of his first wife, but he still remains perplexed about it. How could a young woman, Indian woman, wearing a yellow flowered kurta and Nike walking shoes just disappear? So he wonders, but then it is also symbolic that uh, he believes that since he has disappeared, she has died for him, and that is why he performs her death rituals and does not really wait for her return or tries to trace her. Meeting Brinal is another very important story in which we find how two friends, take different routes. uh, the story centers on Asa, an Indian born woman who immigrates to the United States through an arranged marriage with Mahesh. However, Mahesh abandons her for a younger white woman, leaving her emotionally devastated and socially isolated. Asa receives a letter from Rinal, a childhood friend from India, who advises her not to marry early. Mrinal stayed in India, rejected the traditional wifely role, and embraced a westernized lifestyle, becoming a successful business woman. So, these two women have taken two different routes, and in this story, the novelist shows that whatever routes do they take, their share of pain, their share of disappointment um, falls in their way, and none of their lives is uh, drastically different from each each other. So while Asa feels inferior and ashamed when she compares her life to Mrinal's, because of Mrinal's freedom, Mrinal's agency, and Mrinal's success as a businesswoman, uh, you know, to avoid meeting Mrinal, she makes excuses about her husband and son's busy schedules, lying about her failed marriage. Eventually, she agrees to meet Mrinal, and at the restaurant, Asa feels out of place amid the sophistication and confidence of Mrinal's world, and she believes that Mrinal has taken the right decision, while she herself, despite her warning, has gone a wrong way and entered an arranged marriage. But during their meeting, while she is trying to maintain a facade of happiness, the conversation reveals the emotional costs both women have paid for their choices. So it's not that Mrinal's uh, life is a bed of roses, she has her own share of disappointment, and her successes come with some price like loneliness and emotional trauma, while Asa's traditional life has ended in abandonment and isolation. So the story highlights that neither the traditional Indian female role nor the westernized independent role is free from sacrifice or pain, and both women embody different responses to cultural expectations, and both face unique struggles, and it certainly calls for an approach to life uh, which is different from either of the extremes. One extreme is symbolized by the life of Mrinal, where she rejects marriage, lives life on her own terms, and becomes a successful businesswoman. On the other hand, there is Asa, who enters arranged marriage, bears a child, but is abandoned by her husband, who is an infidel and who courts a white woman and deserts Asa for that. But both these women, suffered this kind of emotional scar and loneliness in their life, and that is why the novelist seems to be sending a loud and clear message that the women have to reshape themselves according to their own expectations, rather than going on either of the extremes of living alone or living in a marriage. There are some other stories also, but for paucity of time I am not going into the detail of them. Altogether, as I said, this collection has 11 interconnected stories. The other stories include Affair, Silver Pavements, Golden Roofs, A Perfect Life, The Maid Servant's Story. And all these stories, include the nuances of women starting anew after adversity, the transformation of women from submissive to strong individuals, the emotional and cultural dislocation experienced by these immigrant women, the complex dynamics of mother daughter or mother son relationships shaped by tradition and modernity. So, if we look at this text, there are different themes. Theme of patriarchy and gender roles is quite embedded in most of these stories, where we find that they consistently explore how patriarchal structures dominate the lives of women in arranged marriages, and how they have limited or no agency to really lead the life of their choice. So they are often treated as commodities, valued primarily for their appearance or ability to bear children, or willingness to conform to traditional roles expected um, of them, and they are expected to be submissive, prioritizing their husbands and family needs above their own, and with little regard for their intellect or individuality. So, as felt in the story, the disappearance, the unknown areas of his wife's existence yawning blackly around him like Chand. So, the husband is completely unaware of the aspirations of his wife, and has always tried to dominate her and make her, subscribe to his way of the world or his worldview. So again, let us go by this observation by Mukhopadhyay, who says their day-to-day life was very peaceful. The wife was not allowed to get entrance in any institution for studies or for doing a job. She wasn't allowed to wear any American dress, as the husband thought that she looked better in Indian dresses. There was only one car which the husband used to and from his office. Though he could afford to buy another for his wife, he did not, as he had not known driving, as if it was an impossible job to get a driving license. The wife was allowed all the freedom in the house except the above, and except in another important area, sex. So look at this, how the protagonist is caught in this patriarchal wave where she has limited freedom within the house and is not allowed to stand on her own, because that may be looked at as an attempt to transgress her threshold. Cultural class and identity crisis, this is another very prominent theme, as we find that most of these stories, talk about Indian values and Western ideals that create some kind of cultural class, which leads to an identity crisis for Indian women caught between the expectations of obedience and their desire for independence and self expression. And the focal point in all these stories is the problem of adjustment arising from cultural variation experienced by Indian woman when she moves towards the West in the mosaic of American Indian culture. So, what happens? They are born in India, they have been trained in a certain manner where they have always been reminded of her inferior, submissive uh, position in the Indian society, where they have always been taught how to be docile, how to be serving their husband, their children, and their in laws without really making much fuss about what they like and what they don't like. But when they go to America, they confront a world where they find that women are much more liberated, and they are, in fact, co partners in almost all spheres of life. And anything that can be done by men is easily done by women as well. And this makes them think about their own submissive, surrendering position, and they feel like questioning themselves whether they deserve this kind of a life. And that's why this results in a kind of cultural class and identity crisis, and they feel like, coming out of the shackles of their patriarchal confines and remake themselves, refashion themselves, revisioning their own life and exercising their agency. So people migrate to foreign lands with expectations of liberty, gratification, and existence, which clashes with the traditional values of their homelands. Caught in between two different worlds, they struggle to maintain their cultural values and adapt themselves to the new environment. So, story after story, we find how the individual aspirations for freedom and agency clash with the traditional norms of the society where women are expected to be submissive and sacrificing. As we find in the story Clothes, Sumita, an Indian bride living in America, has constantly been fed on traditional ideas that it is her moral duty to act like a good Indian wife, which are the signs of respect in India and are strictly maintained in her home in California. Such situations make her impatient and remind her of her homeland, India. So, even if she is living in America and it is expected that her husband will be a liberated man living in America, must be a generous, a man with a free mind, she finds that he continues to be traditional in America and expects her to stick to the wifely duties as defined by Indian culture, even in California. And so, this is something that is quite hurting to Sumita, who expected her life to open up with movement to America. So, I quote from this story: at other times, I feel caught in a world where everything is frozen in place like a glass paperweight. It is a world so small that if I were to stretch out my arms, I would touch its cold, unyielding edges. I stand inside glass world, watching to scream. Then I'm ashamed. Mita, I tell myself, you are growing westernized. Back home, you would never have felt this way. So she's, under a lot of stress because she wants to break free from this glass house in which she has been imprisoned as a doll, and she wants to break free. She wants to scream. She wants to, lead life on her own terms, but then she finds it difficult to break free from her confines. But even after the death of her husband, she does not want to go back to India, her motherland, as she knows. That's when I know I cannot go back. But ultimately, we find that she comes out of that confinement and leads life on her own terms. When her husband gets killed, she has the option to go back to India and lead the life of a destitute Indian widow, sunning all colors from her life. But then she does not want to go back to that life because, she realizes she wants to live life on her own terms. That's when I know I cannot go back. I don't know yet how I will manage here in this new dangerous land. I only know I must, because all over India at this very moment, widows in white saris are bowing their veiled heads, serving tea to in laws, doves with cut off wings. So she realizes and imagines the kind of pathetic life that the widows are expected to lead in traditional Indian society. And now she doesn't want to go back to that, and she wants to lead life on her own terms. So, in her case, diaspora or migration is enabling rather than debilitating. Similarly, in the other story, Meeting Mrinal, Asa laments about her husband's elopement. And I quote, I think of how hard I always tried to be the perfect wife and mother. Like the heroines of mythology, I grew up on patient, faithful Sita, selfless Kunti. Perhaps he fled from us because he wanted a last chance to be the virile Arjun, the mighty Bhim. And for a moment, I feel a sadness for him because he is going to realize it too soon enough that the perfect life is only an illusion. So, she thought of a perfect life for herself, but then she did not find it, and she believes that her husband, who has left her, believing that the perfect life lies for him elsewhere, he will also be soon disillusioned and will realize that there is nothing like perfect life. Rather, we all make compromises and we try to live life in a peaceful manner. Nostalgia and pain of dislocation, they are very, very pertinent in this text. Like Paranspe finds about a critical diaspora theory through responding to Derrida's questions about place identity and belonging, suggesting that diasporic individuals cannot simply rely on established models or communities to define themselves. Instead, as Derrida proposes, one must invent and construct identity anew without fixed templates or guaranteed audiences, embracing hybridity, difference, and the ongoing process of becoming. And this is so true of the most of the protagonists in these stories, who enter a hybrid world and try to balance their life and allow themselves certain amount of liberty and agency, and choose life on their own terms. So, migrants arrive in a new country with hopes and ambitions, but adapting to a different culture is often far more challenging than they anticipated. The harsh realities of assimilation leave deep cultural divisions and scars in their psyche, and this is something that is central to all diasporic experiences, and sometimes it might lead to individuals transcending their previous sense of self and making positive decisions and making their diaspora experience count. In bats, the title metaphor is illustrated when Grandappa uncle observes that bats, despite the danger, keep returning to the poisoned orchard, just as the mother returns to her husband due to the fear of dislocation. And I quote, they don't realize that by flying somewhere else, they will be safe. Or maybe they do, but there is something that keeps pulling them back here. Now, these lines may be applied to the condition of uh, immigrants as well. They know that immigrant lives are full of challenges, and there are chances that they will not be able to cope up with those challenges, but despite that, they're always ready to take challenges, forgetting about their scars. They always try to, find new ways of survival and resilience, and the so just goes on. Includes Sumita stepping into an unfamiliar foreign land fills her mind with anxiety and fear, and she thinks, and I quote, would I ever see my parents again? Don't send me so far away. I wanted to cry, but of course I did not. I would be ungrateful. Father had worked so hard to find this match for me. Besides, wasn't it every woman's destiny? As mother was always telling me to leave the known for the unknown. So, this is how, she feels a certain kind of dislocation and nostalgia early on when she separates from her family, her parents. Similarly, in Silver Pavements and Golden Roof, a glimpse of the nostalgia of alienation is felt by Jayanti, the female protagonist. And, I quote, it is snowing. I step outside onto the balcony, drawing my breath in at the silver marble of it. The fat flakes cool and wait against my face as in a half forgotten movie. The snow has covered the dirty cement pavements, the sad warped shingles of the rooftops, and the rough, noisy edges of things. I hold out my hands to it, palms down, shivering a little. The snow falls on them, chill, stinging, the way to the bone, all the way to the home, to the bone. But after a while, the excruciating pain fades. The snow has covered my own hand, so they are no longer brown but white, white, white. And now it makes sense that the beauty and the pain should be part of each other. Home, I whisper desperately, home, home, home. I want my room in Calcutta where things were so much simpler. So, this shows the acute sense of dislocation and nostalgia that is felt by the protagonist, who grows numb, and initial pain gives way to acceptance, stoic acceptance, and she stops feeling the pain anymore. Transformation and resilience, that theme is very pronounced. As Veena Agrawal points out, most of the short stories in arranged marriage celebrate Indian women's immigration to the United States, a journey from oppressed or depressed conditions to freedom and self discovery with the inspiration from Western influences. So, even though with restrictive environments, these women find subtle ways to negotiate for autonomy, whether by compromising on dress codes, seeking financial independence, or building supportive friendships. Small acts of resistance and negotiation gradually empower them to reshape their lives. Critical incidents such as personal betrayals or the loss of loved ones often act as catalysts for change, and these moments prompt these women to stand up for themselves, demand respect, and sometimes break free from the oppressive relationships. And despite suffering, these women, display remarkable resilience, ultimately finding ways to reclaim their voices and envision new futures for themselves. And so these stories are not only about survival, they're also about growth, hope, and the ongoing pursuit of dignity and self realization on the part of these women. So the women of these stories experience a conflict of consciousness and struggle to define themselves like those of several South Asian and uh, Asians and Americans. In the private realm, the traditional Indian culture, women have to perform some specific duties and follow strict norms of morality, and are transgressed only by those considered daring and depraved. So we find this world peopled with those daring women who dare to dream and transgress the restrictive, oppressive uh, thresholds set for them. So, if we look at arranged marriage from the lens of diaspora, we find how this is akin to the ideological product of that educated class in the modern Orient, as Edward Said observes, which borrows ideas about modernization, progress, and culture from Europe and the United States and participates in its own Orientalizing. So, in the stories, one could observe a conflict and resolution of bicultural pools. Female protagonists are standing in two diverse cultures: an inherited collectivist Indian culture with family ties, responsibilities, and obligations, and the other adopted individualistic American culture driven by liberty, self reliance, and pursuit of goals and self desires, as observed by Paul. What follows as a synergetic articulation in all these stories is hybridity, where conflict is resolved consciously and unconsciously, integrating the sensibilities of both the cultures. So, uh, we find how Divakaruni exposes the shadows of nothingness prevailing in the lives of immigrant women. As Jayanti states, the air is dry and cool and leaves a metallic aftertaste on my lips. Through the characters of her stories, Arranged Marriage, the novelist explores the problems of identity crisis, emotional isolation, and non communication, the experience of migration. The focal point in almost all the stories is the problem of adjustment arising from cultural variation experienced by an Indian woman when she moves towards the West, which is an important theme in the mosaic of American Indian culture. So, in all, if we look at this important collection of short stories, we find that they prominently talk about diaspora and cultural dislocation and gendered, experience of migration. Again, one of the prominent aspects of discussion is tradition versus modernity, where we find how the Indian women are caught between the expectations of their Indian tradition and the promises of modernity symbolized by America. Home and belonging, again, is one of the prominent considerations, and for them, home is where they head to, and it is not a place that gives them emotional connect all the time. And again, another very important aspect is, as I said, while comparing Divakaruni to um, you know uh, Jhumpa Lahiri, that her narrative and her use of language, they are different, as she builds the cultural memory through language in her works, by using frequently the Indian idioms, cultural references and rituals uh, throughout her stories, to reinforce the notion that diasporic identity is shaped by memory as much as by geography. So Indian food, religious practices and family customs are present even in American settings, reminding readers that diaspora involves a constant negotiation between memory and reinvention. The act of storytelling itself becomes a cultural anchor. The female narrators are often recalling their past in India, and as a way to make sense of their current lives, which adds a reflective and therapeutic quality to the collection. So, uh, altogether, Arranged Marriage by Divakaruni provides a powerful exploration of the emotional and cultural consequences of diaspora, especially for Indian women. Her stories reveal that migration is not just a physical act, but a deeply psychological and social transformation of self as well. While the characters often face marginalization, silence, and loss, many also discover resilience, voice, and agency within their diasporic experiences. So, diaspora for them turns out to be an enabling and empowering agent, rather than debilitating, as we have seen happening in the case of V.S. Naipaul and some other writers. So, Divakaruni's work not only humanizes expectations that follow migrants across borders, her storytelling affirms that diaspora is not simply about displacement, it is also about reconstruction of self and identity. So, these are the references, friends, and thank you once again for uh, your company in this class. And as we move forward in the next class, we'll talk about uh, a novel by Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni, The Mistress of Spices, which is one of her masterpieces, and we'll look at it from the lens of diaspora as well. So, looking forward to you joining me for the next class. Till then, thank you very much. Take good care of yourself. Thank you.